Hello everyone, this is El Spectral. Welcome back to the Land of Empires. And today I want to record the real episode 5 of my Apex Arena review series. And in my last video, I discussed popular compositions that people are running in Season 7, both in and out of the Battle Disorder. Now, I certainly do not know all the variations of Season 7 because there are just so many. You cannot really understand Season 7 just based on the Season 7 hero skills. You need to do a lot of trial and error, and over time, people have found a lot of different variations and soft counters to all of those variations. So in this video, I hope to really kind of see what people are running in Season 7, and hopefully we might be able to learn something. So let's dive straight into Warzone 1. We have El Crab versus Bo. Now, I know that these are probably two kind of similarly leveled players. So we can see that they are both Glorious 12.3 and Glorious 12.1 or 2 on the Cavalry and Archer. In this first matchup, we have Team 1, El Crab running 574. Now, when I refer to the heroes, I'm just going to refer to the armament season. So this is season 5, this is season 7, this is season 4. So I'm just going to call this team a 574. Interestingly, we see this 574 beating 776. Now, in my review video, I mentioned that 776 most of the time will overcome 574. And the reason why 574 might have been able to beat 776 here is if Bo ran maybe too few cavalry and archer. So let's see if this was the case. And exactly, so he ran way too few archers. And I think the issue with running too few archers is that the archers die very quickly. Once the archer dies, the cavalry takes exponentially more damage from Leona and Neptune Arc as well. And the more troops you lose early on, the less damage you will be able to deal to his Michael. So let's see if Michael even died. Michael was able to survive, and this is primarily why El Crab was able to win in this first confrontation. So I think Bo really used too few archers. And let's take this chance to just look at the kind of the early setting of this battle. Now, one thing to note as well is that El Crab, despite winning, ran fewer troops than Bo. So we have Leona's first shot going off. Now the first shot doesn't really deal much damage because the shield from the opposing side is still up. So we can see now Lisbeth is dead. And let's take a look at Dorothy now. So Leona is just continuing to pummel the opponent front line. And once Lisbeth is dead, you are pretty much down one key damage dealer against Michael. Now remember, the damage that Michael receives is mostly from normal attack damage. And Lisbeth, her being the archer, she is a key component of dealing damage to Michael. So if she falls too early, your damage against Michael is substantially reduced. So this outcome was a win from El Crab. The next fight we have 666, so full season 6 team versus the leftovers of El Crab. So did Bo run too few archers? I don't think it really mattered because Horn Guard is just kind of weak to a lot of tickling attacks. But the number of cavalry he ran was also a bit low for my taste. But yeah, this is not really worth watching. And interestingly, El Crab ran the 676 variation. And interestingly as well, we can see that the 676 variation actually got the archer killed by the leftovers from Bo. And yeah, he just ran way too few archers. In a one-on-one confrontation, it makes sense to run a few archers, but when you are in a 3v3 confrontation, running few archers might often result in you just having your archer accidentally die. To the left, we have Baron versus Baron. That's kind of weird. To the right, we have Baxi versus Sin. So in the first team, both team is a mirror setup. both ran 776. Now, in a 776 setup, it really depends on the final troop ratio. So the one with the lower troop ratio at the end will be the loser, while the one with the higher troop ratio will be victorious. And when you are victorious, despite having your opponent being left with however many troops, they will all be history. So your leftovers will go to the next fight while your opponents die. Now in the first fight, we can see that Sin X won against Baxi, and the typical strategy in a mirror setup, if you are able to establish that mirror setup, of course the setups can always change during the preparation phase, is that you can run just fewer cavalry and archer against your opponent. As I mentioned in the last video, Neptunarch is very effective at immediately killing the cavalry and archer. We can see the hero rage skill or the hero skill damage is pretty much primarily cavalry and archer. So because Sin ran fewer archers or fewer total cavalry and archers compared to Baxi, he was able to overcome he was able to leave himself with a higher troop ratio at the end. The remaining fights, probably not too interesting. We can see that 547 is quite effective at dealing against 666. I think 547 is a little weaker against 663, where instead of you running Horn Guard, you run Hanzo. So you can have about 1,000, maybe 5,000 archers. You can have about 80,000 cavalry and the rest infantry. And the cavalry will deal a lot of damage to the archer. So let's see how many cavalry Baxi ran. He ran about 55,000, which is, I guess, respectable. But the issue with this composition is that because Horn God has that passive skill that reduces your damage dealt by 65% for the first 15 seconds of the battle, that kind of suppresses the potential damage that your cavalry can bring. Sorry, I got a phone call. I'm going to edit this out. So moving on to Warzone 3, to the left we can see Batty versus Prisky Wafu. Now, Waku is certainly not weak by himself, but Batty is after all one of the strongest players in the game. So let's see what Batty ran as his first composition. So his first composition is actually quite unusual. It is Michael combined with Dorothy and Leona. Now, I'm personally not a big fan of this composition because Michael himself is kind of like a 577 composition. Now, 577, as you know, it is countered by 547. So the Morgan, Michael, and Leona setup. But Batty himself, he kind of just has the stats to make up for that. So the idea of using 547 against this composition is to, I guess, kind of kill the cavalry and do a lot of damage to the infantry, because you are really not able to kill Batty due to his very high stats. And so your goal by running 547 against this composition is to simply kill Dorothy. It will be very hard to kill Michael as well, because Dorothy once again confers a lot of defense to Michael, and you probably will not be able to survive before his Leona kills your own Michael. So kind of the goal is to run 547 against this team to kill Dorothy. And let's see what other two teams he's running. The next team he's running is this team. I don't know what to call it, but it's very bad. And finally, 666. So after you run 547, your next team can be maybe 663. So 663, you would want to run maybe a 1-to-1 infantry to cavalry ratio, and then you'll be able to hopefully clean up this team a bit. And your final team will be 777. Now typically, not 777, sorry, 776. Typically when you run 776, you will want to run mostly infantry and some amount of cavalry and archer. But in this case, against these very bad teams, you would want to run a high amount of cavalry and archer, maybe even a 1-to-1 ratio between infantry, cavalry, and archer. And this is simply due to how much stats he has. The cavalry confers so much defense the Season 7 Cavalry Dorothy, confers so much defense to the infantry that your infantry will pretty much be immortal even when you run a low amount of it. And this is because nothing in these teams can really deal with a Season 7 infantry buffed by Dorothy. So your goal, instead of keeping the infantry alive, because he's guaranteed to be alive, will be to sustain your cavalry and archer through the next two fights. So your first two teams, that being 547 and 663, both of them might end up losing to this team. Actually, it will likely lose to this team. But as long as you can kill the cavalry from this team, your 776 team, having a 1-to-1-to-1 troop ratio, would likely be able to wipe through the remaining Team 2 and Team 3. Of course, this is assuming that you have at least 70 to 80 Lord power, because otherwise you are just simply too weak to contend against the power of Batty. On the right hand, we have Young OG versus Joe Zero. Young OG is actually running the exact same composition as Batty, and I'm looking for whether Joe Zero ran that 546 composition, which it really doesn't look like he is, so I don't think there's much point to review, but it does really showcase the power of 577, whether it's the Neptunarch armor variation or using Michael himself. And looking at the first team, it's pretty much a complete wipe. Let's see if Quinn was able to deal any damage. Not much at all. Looking at the second team, these are just not real compositions. This is kind of like a 776 composition, but instead of Neptunarch with Michael's armor, you have Michael himself. But 776 is just kind of bad versus 577. I mean, 776 or 576, whatever variation of that. It's just generally bad versus 577. And that is because Leona just pummels you while Michael is able to survive against whatever you try to use to kill Michael. That is not Leona. As for the third team, Joe Zero is not running Dorothy, so his Neptunarch would get melted very quickly. But even then, we can see that Dorothy dealt a substantial amount of damage to this composition. So although Young OG as well as Batty ran this composition in Team 1, I don't think this is a great composition to use, especially with 547 being able to counter it very effectively. Moving on to Warzone 4, we have Abu Rayyan versus Woshi. They are running a mirror composition in the first team. Let's see who ran the fewest archer and cavalry. They actually ran fairly similar archer and cavalry, but because Abu Rayyan kind of boosted his troop count, he was able to have an easy victory. Secondly, we can see that we have Morgan equipped with Quinn armor actually versus Morgan himself. And I think this will be an interesting fight to take a look at if it wasn't for Woshi being kind of crippled at this point. In my testings, I've personally found Morgan to be much more effective than either Quinn or Morgan with Quinn armor. Of course, the most effective hero here, I think, is Quinn with Morgan armor, because not only are you able to gain the utility of Morgan being the rage skill boost, you are also able to gain the passive ability of Quinn to make your Michael a bit more tanky. So the remaining fights aren't too interesting to look at. Up next, we have Maximus versus Ink. Maximus ran the classic 547 versus Ink's 776. So here we can see that Ink ran. I'm actually surprised that Maximus was not able to kill the cavalry. Is that really true? Oh, he was able to kill the cavalry. So without the cavalry, this composition is kind of crippled. The next team from Maximus is kind of weird. Personally, I'm not a big fan of this composition. This composition is quite powerful in rallies, but when it comes to 1v1, I'm really not convinced whether this composition is actually good. But because Ink lost his Dorothy kind of stupidly, typically when you are running this composition, I would run equal equal cavalry and archer. I would never really run fewer cavalry and archer than archer or more archer than cavalry. Like the number of cavalries is very important because once the cavalry dies, your Neptunarch becomes paper thin. He will die very easily. To the right, we have Coffin Dancer versus Crimson Knight. Coffin Dancer ran 547 versus Crimson Knight's mirror setup, and it was a wash. Looks like Crimson Knight gave up, so we will move on to the 6th Warzone. Interesting. Phoenix won versus Battery High. I'm not too familiar with Phoenix, but I am familiar with Battery High. In the first composition, Phoenix ran a decent amount of archers and infantry, while Battery High ran primarily Michael and some archers. So let me just take a look at the army size. The army size are fairly comparable. How about the stats? The stats are... The stats are quite significantly better for Phoenix. So it's really hard to interpret which composition was actually better. Up next, we have the archer being killed. Did Battery High ran too few archers? Guess that's the case. And yeah, the rest was a wash. To the right, we have Tyrus versus Dragon. Tyrus ran Glorious 10 versus Dragon's Glorious 10. They look pretty evenly matched, so let's take a look. Once again, 547 versus 547. We have a pretty even trade, although I think he ran way too many cavalry here. There's really no point in running too many cavalry because the only composition that your opponent can use to counter the 547, well, kind of counter the 547, is that they can run 663. And they can kind of try to rely on Chitaurian, the Season 6 cavalry, to kill Morgan. But I don't think you need to run that much Morgan because Leona will really, really make short work of Chitaurian. Anyways, I think the high number of cavalry kind of killed his first team here. But it doesn't really matter because up next we have 676 versus 776. So he didn't take too much damage here. So it was 1v1 in the next fight. And it does appear that we can see how 676 is just simply inferior to 776. And yeah, Kellerman just deals not a lot of damage compared to Neptunarch. And his mistake here was kind of running way too many archers and cavalry as well. While Dragon ran fewer cavalry and even fewer archers. Like personally, if I was confident, I would run maybe 20,000 archers and 20,000 cavalry, or maybe even less, 15,000 cavalry, 15,000 archers, because the first trade was pretty even. If you know your first trade is going to be fairly even, like you don't really need to run that many. And this is really a general concept for when you are playing the Arena of Legends, where your opponent doesn't really get to choose like what to run and be guaranteed that like the defenders really don't get to choose what to run. Like they can choose whatever they want to run and you can just counter it and they won't really be able to change it on the fly. So in this case, for example, I ran 776 against JFK's 576, and the key balance in this scenario is the amount of archers and cavalries you use. You do not want to use too many, but you do not want to use too few either. If you run too few, then you risk having one of them die. The better you can balance the two, the better the result will be. I think in this scenario, I was a little bit too close, but even with this close shave, this remaining composition allowed me to win the next clash. Because we can see how few cavalry and archers he's running in Team 2, but I'm running even fewer. My composition is balanced from the losses in the team in clash number 1. So I was able to win this following confrontation purely based on having a higher remaining troop ratio. Going back to the Apex Arena, since we're in Warzone 11, I guess we can kind of end it here. Starting off with YKBK versus JFK. in this first confrontation, JFK ran, way too few cavalry and archer. Like, I'm not really familiar with how good equipping Kellerman's armor on Neptunarch is, but this is just way too few cavalry and archer versus JFK's 547. JFK has a very strong Leona, so if you want to survive against his 547 Leona, you would at least want to run, I would say, 55 to 65,000. I mean, I would at least want to run maybe 55 to 65,000 cavalry and archer. JFK, because his cavalry and archer are a little weaker than mine, probably even more, maybe 70 to 75,000 cavalry and archer. Only then can his team kind of survive against 547. The clash following that, not much happening. So we'll move on to Raikkonen versus me, myself. In the first clash, I was able to edge out a slight win. And here we can kind of see a comparison of infantry heavy versus archer heavy. And my stats were, ouch, why is my archer attack and defense so crap? Okay, I don't know what happened to my archer attack and defense, but it's absolute junk. But my other stats kind of make up for that. So I guess Raikkonen was right in using more archers than me because his archer appears to be slightly stronger than mine. Let's take a quick look at the troop tier. So his is 12.3 and mine is 12.3 as well. So not much difference is there. But you can also kind of see the balance between my infantry and archer. At the end of the fight, I still had infantry remaining. So this, at least in my opinion, based on the strengths of my infantry, is a proper balance. But of course, my surviving count didn't really matter too much. But we can see that Raikkonen, in his next team, he only had 25,000 cavalry and 15,000 infantry. So had I ran too many infantry and cavalry in my next team, I would have definitely lost this 3v3. And you can see even then, the final ratio was relatively close. Oh shit. Wait, it's alter time. Fuck. Please excuse this interruption. Let me... Oh shit. So I'm going to make another cut. So I hope everyone enjoyed episode 5 of my Apex Arena review series. We got to see a lot of variations and how they performed against their counters as well as compositions they countered. Next episode will probably cover Season 8 instead. I think overall Season 7 has brought a lot of variation and just different dynamics to the combat in the Land of Empires. Seasons prior to that were fairly stale. Actually, Season 7 itself, when it first started, was very stale. Everyone was running Neptunarch, Dorothy plus Lisbeth with Horn God's armor or Horn God himself. And that was really the only legitimate composition. You could run armor variations on Neptunarch like Michael's armor or Kellerman's armor. But really the end result of all those fights were just timeouts. We saw that whether it was solo clashes, rally clashes, or the arenas. But now with the buffs given to Leona, I think that really the Season 7 combat had another layer brought into it. We are able to find counters towards every composition that people came up with. Maybe there are still compositions that we have yet to discover in Season 7 because once again, the skill descriptions are absolute shit. I cannot understand Season 7 based on their skill descriptions, and that is also why I didn't really make any Season 7 videos until now. And now I still don't understand what's going on with Season 7. So I hope that Season 8 will maintain kind of that dynamic play where there's no single composition that dominates every other composition. But at the same time, I hope that their skill descriptions will really be interpretable. I hope that based on their skill descriptions, we can theorize different counters to various compositions instead of having to play everything by trial and error. So I hope everyone enjoyed this video, and I'll see everyone in my next video. Take care.